Well, welcome to the Structural Modeling Video Conference for May 2nd, 2020. We have quite a packed agenda today. We're going to start off with a little overview of systems literacy, about 15 minutes, and then fit that into about another 15 minutes where Mary is going to present some of her work on creating a synopsis of Hall's Metasystems methodology. And then we'll basically work on application structural types and how they may relate to some of the applications of systems literacy. So with that, here's this document here that I sent out. Let's see. Well, we'll just start with this one. Start with the, let's see. There we go. So we'll go with share the screen. We'll go here. So hopefully everyone can see that. It's the Ocean Literacy tagline. And so I got this off of the internet in the final report, Ocean Literacy final report.
Perfect.
I looked at this and I thought, this is really a nice template. And so I started thinking about, what would we put in here for a definition of systems literacy, and what would we put in here for essential principles? And besides that, just this seems to be the very top level. And then in the ocean literacy hierarchy of concepts and principles, and then there were other a number of concept trees and concept structures developed based on these particular definitions and principles. So when I looked at this, so the ocean literacy is understanding the ocean's influence on you and your influence on the ocean. An ocean literate person does these three things, right? Understands fundamental concepts about the functioning of the ocean. So understanding fundamental concepts is basically a key part of being literate about some subject. So for systems, and you'd have to understand fundamental systems concepts. Can communicate about the ocean in a meaningful way. So we'd have to communicate about systems and system concepts in a meaningful way. Is able to make informed and responsible decisions regarding ocean, its resources, or the application of systems and systems concepts. This was kind of interesting to me because I've been organizing and working on a body of, working on a book called Introduction to System Concepts. And I've tried multiple different ways of organizing the material so that it would fit in. And it basically, this is kind of a new approach for me for organizing things. So I was kind of fascinated by it. So I just decided to hack out my first cut at what a systems literacy piece would look like on this. So I will now basically show that, and we can discuss that. There we go. Okay. Maybe make it a little bigger. There we are. So again, the same pattern. It was in the ocean literacy. A systems literacy is understanding the application of system concepts in a wide range of contexts. And so, systems basically can be applied everywhere. So to be literate about systems, you have to be able to understand how they're used in more than one context. A system literate person understands fundamental system concepts and principles, communicates about systems in a meaningful way, and applies system concepts in an informed and responsible manner. So this is this particular part here talks a little bit, address a little bit of value systems. What's the value system in context? What we're doing there. But this part here, of course, a wide range of context means that there's many different areas that are going to be applied. And communicating in a meaningful way means that you have to understand your audience, who and their point of view, and how you can actually make a connection with your audience about the system. So that was my first cut at that. Then the essential principles said every system literate person should know these essential principles. So anything can be described as a system. This is straight from Brian Marr at the University of Washington. He was one of the founders of INCOSE, was a systems person with the U.S. Department of Defense and also with Boeing for a long period of time. Had extensive background in all types of systems. And this was his key concept, is anything can be described as a system. And then basically the way that you would do that is a system may be viewed and described by system behavior, be viewed and described by system structure, may be viewed and described by separating the system from its general context. System concepts may be used to discover systems, and systems concepts may be used to design systems, and systems are used to organize information about a specific subject. So I think these are really basic fundamental principles of systems. Starting with a high level, all-encompassing global statement like at the first principle, allows you to apply these concepts everywhere. Then it starts breaking down a little bit, and starts to where we talk about the different applications of system structure and behavior, so that actually when systems are used to organize information about a specific subject, then this principle can be used to actually, in a graded manner, right? If you have information about a system behavior, if you have a specific information about a specific system's behavior, and you have information about a system's that same system structure, you can actually integrate them and organize that into a more detailed understanding and description of that particular system. So there's a graded range of the way that these things can be approached. And that was my first cut. So with that introduction, I think I'll open this up for any discussion or comments.
Well, thank you, Joe, for taking this disciplined approach to the topic and to following the model of the ocean literacy work. There's no question that ocean literacy model has formed as a basis for many, many other works. And I'll just turn, I just turned my camera on. Do you need to, maybe, that's weird. Let me just see if I can put this one on. That'd be better. There you go. So what I have here is all the literacies starting from ocean, geography literacy, ocean literacy, earth science literacy, atmospheric literacy. There's two people who have done work on ecological literacy. Obviously, climate literacy is a big thing. I've looked at energy literacy, biological literacy, Great Lakes and Lake Erie. They've done some work, Oregon forest literacy, sustainable literacy, environmental literacy. And what you've done here very elegantly is help to put that sort of top level take on this. We've sort of come up with, there's network literacy as well, and we've come up with an idea of calling it the generally acceptable systems principles. I've got several other examples of systems principles, and I think the next step would be for us to, pull these together and get more consensus. around what you've put together there as well, which I think is really very, very, very helpful to move this along to the next stage. I suppose the only other comment I've got is you've talked about systems behavior, which I really like, because that was my introduction to systems, was understanding systems behavior in a course by that name from the Open University in 1978. And I suppose, do you equate behavior with processes? That was one comment. I mean, I don't see the word processes in there, but you could say that's behavior. It's fair enough. And then this whole concept of language and modeling. How do we bring that in? And Kevin might have some thoughts, and Janet and others on all systems are models, essentially, that are constructed in language. And I don't know how to somehow have that in these and maybe it's that anything can be regarded as a system, but thank you, and those are my comments for the moment.
Well, Peter, I think I'll just share this again, but we go back here, we talk about where information and language and all that is down in information. Systems are used to organize information about a specific subject. So
right,
essentially that particular part there is the high level principle. So that's where we start dealing with the idea of how do we organize this information. And you can organize it informally with informal natural language, or you can organize it formally with formal language. And then the more advanced approaches would actually combine both of those. So
okay, so that's a breakout concept from the principle, basically. I mean, if we get onto the concept maps that were developed for
let me stop sharing that, and I'll share one of those maps so that we can talk about that basically a little bit. And here we go. So this I really like. It's kind of a new approach to me. I see that it might be unique to the ocean literacy. When I do a word search and a Google search, this is really the only place I come up with conceptual flow diagrams. They look a lot like functional flow diagrams or ODF charts, but it's a little different. I kind of really think it's an interesting twist. But you do the main branch, the topic branch at top, you do the major concept here, and then then you have supporting ideas or supporting concepts. And so from a structural point of view, then what we do is we name this relationship supports or depends on, something like that.
Right, there isn't any language there on the arrows, which I think we've pointed out, which would be helpful perhaps in a more specific piece of, particularly as we're talking about systems literacy, which is about relationships.
Right.
It's very helpful to to make very clear that we're going to, I think supports or requires is probably a little, I mean, maybe that you can leave it at that simple, but it might be helpful to think about some categories of relationship, maybe that might be more illustrative.
Exactly. So that once we start naming these relationships, then we can assign categories, the AMEI to them. And then we can start doing threads. So we'd have a thread here, properties of ocean water, comes down to A, and then we split off, one thread splits off here to like A4 and goes to A5 and terminates at A5. Then we have another thread that goes from A to A1 to A2 to A3, terminates at A3, but we have a supporting principle. It says it goes, its concept is A2, but the line looks like it goes back up to A1 there. But
there's also a horizontal movement too between these, as in some instances where they'll say that A5 relates to, I don't know what it does, but it like to B6 or indeed to another principle and concept. So there is some, and I don't know if it's in this particular document or not, but there is some lateral relation as well, not only hierarchically top down.
Right. So that basically then what we look at is this cluster of concepts we would have this cluster, this tree. We'd have concept threads that are one type of relationship that put it together, and then these lateral relationships to another tree or another principle, or even lateral relationships internal. Those would be two other types of coupling concepts that we could define and use. So it's very, very, very interesting. And with that, I have used up my 15 minutes of this. Peter has agreed to do the next session on May 16th, and we'll go more into depth on this and work. I'm interested in working this detailed out more, more details on this between now and then. So it will be.
That'll be a good opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Now we were going to have some time for Mary to discuss what she's doing with the work of Hall and the synopsis piece. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mary.
Can you hear me out there? I'm assuming that you can, so I'm going to go ahead and start. The synopsis was primarily born from my being quite interested in 2001, almost 20 years ago, in Metasystems methodology. And I never did read in its entirety the full book, which is almost 500 pages, but I've been both informed and impressed with it each time I go back to it. And when we discovered that it's in such scarce supply, I decided that it might be helpful, and I'm looking for help and participation if anybody's interested, to go through and put together a synopsis of this. I also think that it would be a wonderful thing if somebody inside of the System Sciences working group or in COSI were to see if we could get get this republished. And with that, we'll just start here. That's standard stuff here. Okay, Metasystems methodology. Hall assessed that sensitivity, knowledge, skill, and good judgment with the process itself, in fact, are the most important factors in success. He predominantly thought that this would provide a new synthesis, a unified, efficient systems methodology, which is multi-phase, multi-level, multi-paradigmatic, and creative problem-solving process for use by that same set, individuals, small groups, large to multidisciplinary teams, or teams of teams. And the final thing, which to me caught my eye and probably everybody else's, it's a process, and he's tried to put it together, that is practically context-free, but based on the systems sciences and the applied sciences. The format that I used then was just to pick up and describe his overarching framework of the book itself. Part one, as you can see, philosophical foundations. Next, the time dimension. Next, the logic and human dimensions. I have placed links in each of those so that if you wanted to go philosophy, you can click on that and go to what philosophy. That's one of two. And then chapter 2, and so on and so forth. We can take a look, but I'd prefer not to spend the time with going through the rest of these at the moment, with the exception of saying that in chapter 4, the basis of systems methodology and scientific method may in fact be the next particular set of things that might provide a real value for us. Okay, back. So back to chapter 1. And I looked at these and decided motivation and basis and metamorphosis and so on and so forth is pretty much background material. But the morphology of systems methodology was that which interested me the most. Morphology 1.5. The morphological analysis is a study of structure and form, and it provides a perspective on all the major activities that Hall intends in systems methodology. As you can see, there are 4 dimensions there. One is time, another is logic. This is a somewhat different kind of logic. The time dimension, as he describes it, provides the coarse structure. The logic dimension provides a finer structure to break that down. Then there's knowledge or content. And fourth is cultural, political, and behavioral. And it's interesting to note that of all of these, the cultural, political, behavioral actually occupies well over half of the book. The first 3 are contained more predominantly in sections 1 and section 2. To the time dimension, there are 7 phases in a generic system life cycle. We go to the time. This provides the specifics related to what he intends for each of the areas that are, and these are, I'm sure, very recognizable to people who are familiar with the life cycles that are used by systems engineers, and for that matter, life cycles that are used in a number of different professions, but some of them use them in excess in one area or another and don't use hardly any portion of the others. So that's predominantly why that's interesting. Just click on the
Which back?
Yeah. Logic dimension consists of problem definition, value system design, system synthesis, systems analysis. Now, I don't know, again, how many people really spend time with value system design, selecting the set of objectives and goals that are going to guide the search for alternatives. So what that does is it provides multi-dimensional decision criteria for selecting the most appropriate system. Otherwise, you'd have no real way of knowing. Now just click the whole thing.
Here?
Click. Click any place.
I did.
Oh.
So where are we going?
Oh, well, let's just do this.
Down?
Down arrow. There you go. Oh, just... Yeah, there's the next one. Okay, optimization, finding the most appropriate one. Most people are familiar with that. Decision making, though, evaluating the consequences and incorporating them is something that is not necessarily something that is done with any normal portion of rigor, and then planning for action. Now go back here. Let me do this. There we go. Okay. These are then organized in an activity matrix, and you can see here, these are the elements of the fine structure matrix, which go across the top. These are the ones that Hall refers to as the logic. The phases of the course structure are the time ones.
Do go down.
Oh, okay, no.
What do I do?
I want to go back, but that's okay. Oh, all right, that's fine. Joe's got a Mac and I've got a Windows box, and so I don't know how to navigate his. We haven't practiced this. This is the overall convergence of the activities matrix. What this does is it shows how necessarily when you perform an activity inside of the activities field that you really need to converge overall in order to go down to the next step. So this shows how it's done. In other words, problem definition expands the scope because it increases the number of possible solutions. This is something that's probably ultimately very familiar to Kevin, because this is part of what, although he doesn't necessarily call it this, they end up doing inside of Warfield's work. In the ISM, the value system design is judgmental. It places restrictions on the kinds of alternatives acceptable. System synthesis increases the number of options. Systems analysis deduces the consequences each system relative to their goals, but it permits later elimination for many ideas. Optimization restricts and refines both the scope and the decision-making, then incorporates the evaluations into the decision criteria. And that's where a gross reduction of ideas ends up because of rigor in the mechanical applications, so that you then get to a point of convergence, so you can then move to the next state in the activity matrix. Okay, let's go down. Iteration or feedback of activities is really extremely interesting, and I've got to admit that this is the first time I've paid serious attention to this particular portion of the morphology. But figure 4, 11.4, the cornucopia model of SM, as a thin shell, consists of layers that have subsystems, materials, and so on, and they each transverse a similar but unique process. Just click on there. And this is it, shown in a little bit larger format. The layers actually represent different things that are being gone through as you go through time. And all of them go at somewhat different paces. Now go back. And then if you stretch the radial and transverse axes to separate the segments and then look into the larger end, the hyperfine structure model of the systems methodology, click on that now. And you can see here how the stimulus from the environment goes in, and some of them go one way, some of them go another, and they even often go in both directions or are receiving input from both directions. And so as you go around the spiral of problem definition, value system design, and so on and so forth, you can see that this sets you up for looking at very different levels. Go ahead and go back. There you go. Now back. Now, that takes us to the knowledge or content dimension. The knowledge dimension refers to subject matter fields or domains of knowledge, representing what are today, and mind you, this was written in 1989, so it does not cover everything, but it introduces a third dimension, which creates a more robust systems methodology. And then we'll show a couple of examples. The morphological box is something that, as you can see, has the phases or the course elements, time elements, and the time dimension on the what would be known as the, well, I don't know how to tell it, just from the way you see it there. And then the fine dimension, the logic elements, go along the horizontal at the bottom here. There you go.
Yeah.
And then the knowledge domains range up from and go from one, engineering, to medicine, architecture, business, law, management, and social sciences. Next example. Decision-making. Oh, let's go back one. Decision-making in the development phase of the law, okay, and this is called A365. So then when we go, which might take place in a congressional committee by voting on draft bills presented and debated before the committee. There you go. So then what I've done at the top on the upper left corner here is say, okay, the development phase is what we're talking about. The decision-making logic elements is on the bottom, and then law is number 5. So we find ourselves in a box discussing specifically things about the law. There you go. Within the systems development life cycle or phase, and within this decision making, you can't do that. Okay, back again. And now example 2 is address the operational phase of medicine, which is A612 through A672, which includes the work of the general practitioner of medicine. So then you're looking at something that looks more like this. The operational phase is clearly number 6 on the time elements or time dimension. You're looking at all the logical elements. So you're spanning all the way across the horizontal on the logic elements, the fine structure, and your knowledge domain is medicine. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, you can go back here.
All right.
Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and go back to example 2.
Oops.
Knowledge dimension. Example 2. Now just go down 1. There you go. Okay. Hall's comments regarding the knowledge dimension at the very end of this piece talks about the natural sciences not originally placed along the knowledge dimension because they're associated with the scientific method. Later in his book, he says a comparison between the scientific method and systems methodology, which comes in section 4.1.2, demonstrating sufficient coalescences to natural sciences should be placed and scaled on the knowledge dimension at the first rank in the proposed partial order. So you can go down 1 here. There you go. And that represents a picture of where the natural sciences would be, and it would move all the rest of those up. Now go back to the, no. Okay, 1.5. There we go. There we go. Now just down. Down, down. There we go. Down 1 more. Down, there you go, right there. When he compared and talked about the scientific method versus systems methodology, I thought that this would be helpful because at least it gives you an idea of what are we looking at? The time? Oh, okay. Motivation, personal need, usually social need, sometimes systems methodology, social need and goal-oriented. Nature of goal, knowledge for its own sake, but systems methodology says wise use of knowledge and efficiency responsive. And you can read those just as well as I can, but it's a very instructive comparison between the scientific method and systems methodology. Next page down. And then these are the last of them, logic, structure, and behavior. Behaviorally limited systems methodology is behavior does not distinguish individual from collective inquiry, and it's not behaviorally limited. Limitations, you can read as well as I. Systems methodology is severe always in terms of time because work is schedulable, money is set by project, scientific method depends on values of patrons, knowledge, severe work can point to need to new knowledge, publication, results often developed in secret under systems methodology, scientific method, results disseminated freely by publishing and teaching, no patents. Now back. Okay, now back. Now go to human dimension. Okay, the human dimension is this. Recognizes that that designers and users play characteristic roles. They're bound within a culture, determines their preferences, attitudes towards risk, management styles, languages, choices of data and model used, and other factors. Let's go to the next page. Hall's observations, 89, SM has no comprehensive way of coping with problems presented by this fourth dimension. It helps to be as sensitive to decision maker, his social milieu, and biases as to the strict logic of the activities matrix. The above factors suggest and justify the use of multidisciplinary, etc. teams. Such teams require a skilled facilitator to make it work best. It sounds more and more like what Kevin does. Some Eastern cultures appear to more easily assimilate them because each individual sees himself as integral with everything. In Western cultures, individuals tend to be more independent, so that this strongly suggests that the properties of social systems, which are exercised subconsciously, may be just as important as the highly rational procedures of the other three dimensions. Down one. Scaling of the knowledge dimension is debatable. The scaling of human dimension is both debatable and hypothetical. Systems subject to SM are goal-directed, intended to satisfy human names, but scaling could be a partial ordering of values. And he does postulate the possibility that there exists a stable hierarchy of values. At any given level, there may be several values, each irreducible one to the other. On a project, you may have those values, may have one set of values, and on another project have the two values reversed. Down one. Establish some constraints on the hypothetical partial order scale between two extremes. Near to the bottom, everything dealing with efficient allocation of resources, since they serve more often as means to higher ends. Nearer at the top, formal truth and factual truth, perhaps as intrinsic values. Again, without those kinds of truths, one would be unable to achieve any other values. A prerequisite for this is intellectual freedom. Other values may lie between the extremes, and given the above, absolute values may exist. Some values may be self-sufficient and coordinate. Okay, we can just go back now to the top. There we go. So that concludes. Sorry, I took a little bit of extra time and we kind of fumbled through. We'll practice next time, or I will. Open for discussion, questions, comments.
Thank you. What did you want us to, what in terms of working on a synopsis, what can you just say a little bit more about that?
Well, because I did not know how and just learned how very, very
Expensive.
both expensive and almost non-existent the source of this work is. It was something that I felt needed to be out in the public domain to some extent, just so that people have an idea of just how much of this work has already been performed and done. I see no real need, for example, for us going back and reinventing everything that's contained in here. Certainly the work is somewhat old, 89, 90, but most of the contents of this work are things that we're treating as brand new all over again, which is mildly discouraging to me.
There's a lot of that, and it's really unfortunate because there's a lot of time wasted by people thinking they've come up with something new, and it was sort of talked about 60 years ago, and this is very much a case in point. I mean, it's a very rich work, as you say. So how to, I think, to move forward, it may be to take out of it the things that are immediately practical that people can use. In his outline of an approach to a project there with, I think, whatever number of steps, and some of the other pieces may be, the pragmatics of it, which will then prompt people to dig into it in more detail. I know that would be helpful to me, for example, even in the implementation of the systems literacy project, to tie the two things together. I mean, we've been talking about systems literacy now for 4 or 5 years, and I finally feel in a position to make some really strategic and tactical movement on it. And Hall's framework could help us organize it, and that could be like a case study in application.
That sounds great. One of the things that I did not come back to and that I'd highlighted on Hall's own comments regarding the knowledge dimension is, and I'll quote here, when and if the goal of systems science is achieved, right? The three-dimensional morphological box may be telescoped down into only a few layers, etc. But when I read that and looked at it and then highlighted it, I realized that I wasn't sure what exactly he thought the goal of systems science was. And I found then earlier in text, in part of his introductions, that he believed that that goal of systems science was to evolve a super science called systems science, which integrates the sub-sciences into appropriate sets by developing linkages among them. Yeah,
I think that's a definition, and it's probably a helpful one. I mean,
page 20 and 21.
Okay,
Sorry.
page 20 and 21. That's helpful.
Yeah.
I've been spending some time looking at some tapes that James Miller put together, and just actually listened to the first of a lecture series that he did on living systems theory, where he gives his personal account of his view on how general systems theory developments occurred as a move towards science. And it might be helpful. I'll give you some pointers to look at that video. It's a 57-minute piece, and I'll send you the transcript. You might find that instructive in another way.
Great.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Again, this is a work in progress. Mary's not feel comfortable distributing it widely yet, but just wanted to kind of show what the work she was doing, and invite other people that were interested to participate, and also find and help focus on certain areas that would be the most valuable, like Peter has talked about in the pragmatic components. So we'll see how that goes. If you're interested, just email us or the list afterwards, and I'm sure Mary will appreciate any assistance. Okay. So this has been a kind of an interesting session. Last time we were going to talk about application structural types and a little bit about systems literacy as it applied to application structural types. But what I found when I started digging into the systems literacy piece, as I pointed out earlier, is that these have these idea of conceptual flow charts. And really, it seems like the ocean literacy folks may have invented that concept. I couldn't find any references to it.
No, I'll give you some. I'll find some for you.
Okay, good. But it's an educational type of activity?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I found there, I think maybe, let's see. Let me have a lot of references here for today. Maybe I did find one, and it talked about a 5-step process that you go through. And the process, I did find one on how to actually create a conceptual flowchart, and it was to pre-think, just in general, just off the top of my head as I remember it. You have individuals get together and pre-think what their concepts are and their ordering of those and what are important, how they relate to each other. And then you do it in a group, and then you coalesce that and come up with a final type of approach. And that generally, from the little that I've read about it, um, is very similar to the types of steps in structural modeling and interpretive structural modeling, where you use the nominal group technique, where people first are, even though they're co-located, they're not working together, and then you have a structured interaction. So there seems to be some many similarities between the processes, and I think that's very encouraging. They're both group processes, and taking groups of experts and encoding their expertise. And so application structural types and their attributes. So we're talking about this because of the curriculum structural type. Just in general, application structural types were developed after an analysis of the patterns that continued to be displayed in many different ISM events. And so when they would perform an interpretive structural modeling event on a certain subject or in a certain context, then they started to see these patterns develop. So they named them. And so that's essentially what the idea is behind application structural types. So the main goal in the evaluation we have here is the establishment, development of standard system metrics and attributes, which indicate how well the basic structural models align with the interpretive structural models. And so when we have folks that are just performing the activity and then they generate some output, which are graphics and different patterns, then you analyze those using the mathematics, the basic structural modeling, and then you are able to compare that to the goal of the interpretive structural modeling activity. And then I talked about a couple of different examples here. One is the 19 cities problem. It's a classical problem I put together. It's simply a north of type of relationship, which is a very straightforward single-threaded relationship, and would be similar to an idea that if we did a group of conceptual objects in a conceptual flow chart, and what those arrows, those relationships, they would be, those flow charts would be multi-threaded, but any one particular thread would be single-threaded. And that would be, if you use the idea of depends on or supports, then that would be more of a structural type of model. And in the real system, there was structural. You would have a system model structural. The objects are real. Of course, in the problematique or in the conceptual flow graph, the objects would be conceptual. Relationship could either be structural or behavioral. But these are the types of things that you would use to quantify and evaluate different application structural types. We look through these, we categorize them, and the relationships is either global or local. And the primary aspect there between global and local is that the global type of relationship creates a single-threaded graph, and a local relationship will allow multi-threaded graphs. And that's the key indicator depending on how you must address the group that's putting that together. And of course, it's then you talk about it, whether it's structural or behavioral. and the logical properties and the semantic alignment with the model object. So these are all considerations of looking at a application structural type. And then we went through and did a literature review. In the first column is the application structural types and the general problematique, no way, one way, and two way. Enhancement structure, intent structure. Now here's the curriculum structure. Now that's the one that that brought us here, that we were talking about when talking about developing these ideas for system literacy and ocean literacy, looking at the conceptual flow graphs. They're basically structural. They're knowledge and experience packages. And so these knowledge and experience packages in the conceptual flow charts are put together as concepts, as examples of these conceptual things that you have to understand, and how these conceptual things relate to other conceptual things through the relationships. In this particular case, it will enhance the value of local and behavioral. So basically, similar to the conceptual flow graphs, would have a local property, so it would be multi-threaded, just like the conceptual flow graphs. Behavioral, say, okay. And I guess if you're looking at the structure of the chart, or if you're looking at the behavior of the activity, it would depend upon how you would rank that. So that could be either way. And it's definitely content specific. And we assumes transitive on this particular single-threaded, any single thread that you go through in the multi-threaded graph would have transitivity. Not every node would be transitive with every other node, because some nodes would not be on the same thread. And the curriculum is knowledge discovery, how knowledge and experience packages are interrelated. Discover how to do that. And basically what we're doing in the conceptual flow graphs is we have a group of experts in the area that know that knowledge, and we're getting the knowledge from these experts arranged into a way that they agree that it is relevant. So let's see. So that's kind of an overall view of the curriculum and the curriculum application structural type, which came up quite a few times in the literature and the active. They have done many different studies and activities, ISM studies on developing curriculum. And then so anyway, there's basically, and also a priority structure, which is again, is a global. So it has a single thread. And so that's a overview of application structural types and how the curriculum structure relates to the conceptual flow graph, conceptual flow charts. So those, I think with that, we have about 7 minutes left. So I'm going to open this up for any questions or comments. Well, what I find is that there's a strong similarity between ISM and what appears to be these the conceptual flowchart development.
Yeah, except the development of them is a sticky note and negotiated process that was involved. Well, when we did it, at least I think there were about 40 or 50 people in the room, and we were literally in a big physical space. And I have some video recording of it somewhere, which I'll dig out for May 16th. And people were moving Post-it notes around. There wasn't an ordered process. in the way that I think ISM and Warfield and your work might indicate.
Right, and I think that, I think that that's one of the reasons for that. Is it seems to me you develop like what 26 principles or something like that.
Well, 7 principles. There's about 44 or so concepts, and then there's about 720 little, supporting concepts in those concept flow diagrams.
So the trees, each tree, there's a number of concept trees and groups.
Yeah, well, it gets more detailed as you go up through the grade bands. It was designed for K through 12 curriculum, and so there's maybe 3 or 4 in the K to 1 arena, but when you get up to the 12th grade, they're very complex, intricate diagrams.
Right. So that within the ISM, we're focused on a single graph, but within the conceptual flowcharts, actually there's a number of them, and they interrelate to each other between the principles.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
So
and the concepts.
Right. So that second dimension, even second and third dimension, to arranging these object trees, it makes it structurally different than ISM, but there's similarities. So the similarities is you're working with large groups, you're collecting consensus on knowledge, and so those are the things that are going on. So
and in relation to systems literacy, selecting an approach that gives honor to whether it's ISM or the educational approach that we adopted for ocean literacy, or whether it's a meta system methodology, what is appropriate for what application at what time.
I want to say both about Paul's work and Joe and Mary's work, that I think, Peter, when you see these things, you tend to think, oh, this looks very regimented, and we need something more experiential and spontaneous. But
not necessarily. I mean,
this is, well, yeah, I think, I know you've said this over the years. The problem is that if, in order, this is a 1,000-year-old, multi-1,000-year-old problem. Once you try to be systematic about something and you try to encode it in some way where it can be transmitted more than a face-to-face transmission, then you're going to lose something in the encoding, and then people will say, oh, but that doesn't really capture it, so let's start over. I think I completely agree with Mary. I think to some extent people should be forbidden to reinvent something that was already done so well by Hall, decades ago. People can look at your work in any of the curriculum development work in any of these literacy efforts and say, oh, that doesn't really capture what we were trying to convey, because that just looks regimented. But it's, as Warfield says there in the curriculum development, knowledge/experience. I guess that's the key in, how do you ensure that you shape the knowledge and the experience together? It's it runs through all of these things. And so I guess the other question I had for you directly is, what difference do you think it made that the people were working with sticky notes?
Well, no, I don't. I'm just saying that's what happened. I'm not making a value judgment about either or, to be honest.
Right, but I don't even see any real. I see that as more of an ad hoc version of ISM. It's you could argue that. I'm absolutely. I don't see a real difference. That's what I wanted to ask. I
was just highlighting that there was a difference in the sense.
That's what I'm asking. What difference was there?
Well, that one didn't follow a process called ISM, and we did not use computer.
It was ad hoc. It was ad hoc, but it was still an attempt to structure.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. It was definitely It was definitely an interpretive structural modeling process.
That's right. I
With
would
a,
see
maybe
those-
I, little s, little m, not
right. Yeah, I'd see those as two cases of the
Absolutely.
same general,
absolutely.
general
And
issue.
all
Yeah.
I'm saying is that, you know, that's how that occurred, and it came up with a result that has been accepted around the world by and large by many as being self-evidently appropriate.
Well, we're now at the end of the hour, so we're going to wrap it up here within the next minute. Next session will be May 16th. Peter has agreed to lead that discussion and share with us more information about the ocean literacy approach. Maybe Mary will have some more information to share on the Hall project, and we will just continue to develop and move forward.
Thank you.
Any last questions?
No, I like to suggest that in June we begin planning a project just around what should we do to deploy this systems literacy project, which is give you a chance to learn the inquiry process and a way to scale up involvement using several tools that we have that you can use online or on your phone, and then but do something simpler than trying to model all of system science. We'll just have an action plan for developing the system literacy project at scale.
Okay, so that would be on June 6th?
Yeah.
Would you like to lead that, Kevin?
I've been talking to Tom. Tom is actually suggesting that. So
Okay.
between he and I, we'll act as facilitators, but I think Janet and Peter and maybe yourself would be good brokers into the stakeholder communities.
Sounds excellent. So I'll get that on the schedule and written up and out with the notes for today.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for your participation, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.